After 4 consecutive years of the Golden State Warriors versus LeBron James, we finally have some new blood in the NBA Finals. Well, not completely new blood, but we still have some new blood. And some is better than none. Representing the Western Conference in the 2019 NBA Finals, the Golden State Warriors. Let's all give them a round of applause. Nobody thought the Golden State Warriors were going to be here except for 100% of people and sports fans all around the country and the world. Representing the Eastern Conference in the 2019 NBA Finals for the first time in the history of their franchise, the Toronto Raptors. Don't let us down, Raptors. Now, the Raptors, they're the most interesting team that I think has ever made the NBA Finals. And I'll explain why a little bit later. But it's pretty obvious, why it's kind of interesting. But still, it's just such a remarkable story. We've already seen a couple of remarkable turnarounds in sports just this year. We saw Tiger Woods win the Masters, getting back to his glory days after everything he's been through in the last decade. We saw Virginia men's basketball win the NCAA tournament 1 year after they made history for the negative reasons on losing to a 16th seed UMBC. Then a year later, they make history for the right reasons. So we've seen two big turnarounds. And now we're adding the Toronto Raptors to the list of remarkable turnarounds in sports. And just think about where the Raptors were at this time last year. They had gotten swept by LeBron in the second round of the playoffs. They fired the coach of the year, Dwayne Casey. And they bring in Nick Nurse. They trade for Kawhi Leonard. They trade DeRozan to get Kawhi Leonard. A lot of people are questioning this trade. A lot of people think that Kawhi Leonard being in Toronto was only going to be a one-season deal, only a 1 year kind of plan. But now the Raptors, they're in the NBA Finals. And they are the most interesting team that I think has ever made the NBA Finals. Because let's just think about it. I'll get to it at the end. But let's preview the NBA Finals. And this is the first time that when I've covered the NBA Finals, is I'm actually having some optimism and a little bit of excitement and enthusiasm about an NBA Finals preview and prediction. Because it's no longer Golden State and Cleveland. There's still Golden State, but at least we have a new team to analyze, and that's the Toronto Raptors. So, before we make a prediction, ultimately, we have to go over some keys for the NBA Finals. And there are 3 keys that I have. The first one is win Game 1. Because I think the winner of Game 1, of course you would say that winning Game 1 is pretty obvious. But winning Game 1 in the NBA Finals, well, in any series in that matter, it just sets the tone. And I think the winner of Game 1 is going to set the tone for the rest of this series. Because if you think about it, you have Golden State having much longer rest than Toronto. However, Toronto does not have to go to Oracle for Game 1. They get Game 1 at home. So Game 1, I think for the first time in a long time in the NBA Finals, that Game 1 is up in the air. Because do you go with Golden State, who has rest, but they have to travel to another country, or do you go with the Raptors that may not have as long of a resting period than the Warriors do, but they don't get to leave. They don't have to leave. They get to stay home and not go to another country. So this is going to be a very unique series, and the traveling is going to have a huge effect on both the teams. And it's pretty good that they do the 2-2, 1-1-1. But either way, if this series goes 7, this could be one of the most grueling finals in NBA Finals history. Because you have 2 teams traveling to another country if you get that far to Game 7. Well, you're going to have them regardless, because Golden State gets games 3 and 4. So traveling is going to have a huge effect on these teams. And the benches have to step up on both teams. And which also leads into my third key for this. Is you have to take advantage when your opposing star players are out. So in other words, the Raptors have to take advantage when Steph and Clay are on the bench, when KD's on the bench, when Draymond's on the bench. And the Warriors have to take advantage when Kawhi's on the bench, when Lowry's on the bench. You have to take advantage. But the problem is for the Raptors, what's going to be a challenge for them, is that even if Steph and Clay are on the bench at the same time, you're still going to probably have Draymond Green out there. Depending on what game of the series it is, you may most likely have Kevin Durant out there. As Kevin Durant's status is questionable, well, it's not really necessarily questionable, it's just up in the air, as well as the status of Boogie Cousins. Those are both up in the air. And now let's go over some keys for the Golden State Warriors. You have to contain Kawhi Leonard. Now, I believe the last time that the Warriors played Kawhi Leonard in the NBA playoffs, it was Game 1 of the 2017 Western Conference Finals. And Kawhi was completely dominant in that game until he got injured. Many questioned that it was a cheap shot on Zaza Pachulia, but Kawhi Leonard was really dominating that game. He was the main reason why the Spurs built up that 25-point lead that game. And the Warriors ultimately came back, and that proved to be a series breaker and then a season breaker for the Spurs. So if the Warriors want to win this series, they're going to have to contain Kawhi Leonard. Because if Kawhi Leonard completely goes off on this Warriors team, if he scores 40, if he averages 35, 40 a game, the Raptors are going to have a good chance of winning this series. And you have to get Steph and Clay going early. Because here's the big thing. I also could have tied this into keys on both sides, but I'll say it now. You got to get your star players going early and build up as big of a lead as you can. Because we've seen multiple times throughout these NBA playoffs, not even just with these prospective teams, but we've seen teams get to a big lead and then ultimately the team starts to come back. We saw the Trailblazers get to a 15, 17-point lead 3 times against the Golden State Warriors, and the Warriors came back each and every single time. They kept digging and clawing their way back into the game. And if you're a team that has a big lead in this NBA Finals, you've got to keep the pedal down. You can't stop for just a moment. If you have a 17-point lead in the third quarter, you've got to try to get a 25-point lead. You've got to try to get a 30-point lead. Because no lead is going to be safe in these NBA Finals. I can promise you that. And you have to be careful on how you operate Kevin Durant and Boogie Cousins, like I just addressed, that both of their statuses are up in the air for the NBA Finals. But from a realistic standpoint, I could see Kevin Durant possibly sitting out of Game 1, although it could be a bit of a risk if you sit Kevin Durant out. I feel like either Kevin Durant is not going to completely play in the Game 1, or he's going to be limited. He might see maybe about 15, 20 minutes Game 1 at the very most. If he plays, I think Kevin Durant, if he doesn't play Game 1, I can definitely see him coming back Game 2. Depending on if the Warriors win Game 1 or not, we could see him get limited action. But if the Warriors end up losing Game 1, I could see Kevin Durant getting right back in the starting role. And I could see the same thing for Boogie Cousins. I think Boogie Cousins will definitely come back at some point in the series. Probably Game 2 or Game 3. But either way, the Warriors have to be careful on how they operate those two just in the rotation. Now on to the Toronto Raptors. And this is a big one for the Toronto Raptors. You have to play all 48 minutes of each and every single game. If you want to beat the Golden State Warriors, you've got to play all 48 minutes. You can't play 25 minutes. You can't play 30 minutes. You can't play 35 minutes. You can't play 40 minutes. You can't play 45 minutes. You got to play all 48 minutes of the game. And depending on what happens in the NBA Finals, even more than that, you gotta prepare for overtime. You gotta be well prepared, because we had an overtime game last year in the NBA Finals. And always be alert. Don't pull a J.R. Smith. Importantly for the Raptors, Kyle Lowry has to step up. You can't just depend on Kawhi Leonard. Even though Kawhi Leonard looked pretty dominant the last time that he played the Warriors in the playoffs, you can't just fall back on him. You got to have other people step up as well. You've got to have Kyle Lowry step up, because Kyle Lowry, in the past, he's had questions around him. Does Kyle Lowry step up in the playoffs? Can Kyle Lowry ever step up in the playoffs? Well, now you're in the NBA Finals. Kyle Lowry has to step up for the Raptors for them to even have a chance of winning this series. And third key for the Raptors, you've got to get Draymond Green and Klay Thompson in foul trouble early. Because what happens if you get Draymond Green and Klay Thompson in foul trouble early? Even if you get one of them in foul trouble early, it's good. Because if you get Draymond Green in foul trouble early, their shield on defense goes away. At least part of it does. If you get Klay Thompson in foul trouble early, you force Steph Curry to have to play defense, which he's not good at. Steph Curry doesn't play defense. He's afraid to play defense. And the Raptors, they need to exploit that if they get Klay Thompson and Draymond Green on that bench early in foul trouble. Take advantage of your home crowd, because you've got the home court advantage. Take advantage of having home court, because the Golden State Warriors because Golden State has had home court in the NBA Finals for the last 4 seasons. So you've got to take advantage of having Golden State at a weaker point, because they have the home court. Take advantage of it. You have almost 2 countries rooting for you. You've got the entire country of Canada rooting for you, and you've got 99.98% of America rooting for you. So almost 2 whole countries rooting for you to win this NBA Finals. But anyway, back to what I was discussing about. It forces Steph Curry to play defense, which he doesn't want to play defense. He's scared to play defense because he gets exposed every single time he plays defense. So, which leads into my matchups to watch for this NBA Finals. Starting off with Kyle Lowry and Steph Curry. Now, Steph Curry is definitely, like I said, afraid to play defense, because Klay Thompson typically guards the guy that Steph is supposed to guard. As said by Recency Bias Radio, the Thanos, or is it Thanos? I have not seen many Avenger movies, so I don't know how it's pronounced, but either way, he's the Thanos or Thanos of the sports community. And I advise everyone to subscribe to him. He definitely knows what he's talking about in sports, even more than I do. So subscribe to him. He knows a lot. And he knows more about the NBA than I do. And every single time he mentions how Klay Thompson is much better than Steph Curry, how Draymond Green is a much more valuable piece to the Golden State Warriors than Steph Curry is. So, especially when you get, although I will say when, because I guarantee that Draymond Green and or Klay Thompson will be in foul trouble early in at least one game in this series. You've got to exploit Steph Curry's weakness, and that's playing defense, that's guarding someone. Another matchup to watch, Pascal Siakam and Draymond Green. I think the early portion of this NBA Finals is going to be determined who steps up in the paint between these two, between Siakam and Draymond Green. That's going to be probably what I think is the biggest matchup to watch, especially down low inside the paint. Because it could come down to which of these two guys get into foul trouble early on. Because I could see one trying to kind of draw fouls on the other guy. So it's going to be a battle between those two in the paint. Also, Marc Gasol versus the Golden State Bigs. Because I think the Toronto starting 5, I think they could match up to Golden State's current starting 5. I feel like if Kevin Durant and Boogie Cousins don't come back, I think this starting 5 for Toronto can definitely match up against Golden State. fact, I think it could match up a little bit even better. Because you have Siakam, Gasol. Definitely got two bigs compared to Draymond Green. And I think, assuming that you have the starting lineup, if you have Curry, Thompson, Durant, Green, Boogie Cousins, I think that the Raptors starting five can match up to the Golden State starting five. I definitely think so. And Siakam and Draymond Green, that I think is going to be the biggest matchup. Then Marc Gasol versus the Golden State bigs, whether it's against Draymond, whether it's against Andrew Bogut. Depending on who it is, any Golden State big, I think Marc Gasol is going to have to be a difference maker if the Raptors want to have a chance of winning a couple of games in this series. I think if the Raptors, if they win a game or two, I think Marc Gasol is going to be a huge factor on why they did, based off how he performed against the Golden State bigs. And finally, this is definitely a possibility because we don't know about Kevin Durant, but Kawhi Leonard versus Kevin Durant. I think it's going to be interesting seeing two of the best players in the NBA going at it for a shot at the NBA Finals. But like I said, I think Kevin Durant potentially sits out Game 1, if not gets limited minutes. Could come back Game 2. I think depending on what happens in Game 1 with Golden State is going to dictate how much Kevin Durant actually plays in this NBA Finals. And I've done everything that I wanted to discuss, and it's time for the prediction. So ultimately, here's what I think. I'll go game by game just like I have been throughout the last 4 seasons I've done this. Game 1, like I said at the top, Game 1 is going to be a huge factor on who potentially wins this NBA Finals. Because Game 1 is going to set the tone for this NBA Finals, like I was addressing. You can't really give anyone necessarily an advantage. Although I would say I think it's maybe about 55% to 45%. Because Golden State, they may have a couple of days extra rest than Toronto does, but they have to travel to a different country. Even though it's just traveling to Canada, but still, the traveling for Game 1, just not having your home court, because Golden State is definitely not used to having, they're used to not having, they are not used to not having home court. And Toronto, they may not have that long of a rest, because once the game tips off, you're going to have Sunday rest, Monday rest, Tuesday rest, Wednesday rest, and then Thursday day rest. So that's about 4.5 days rest. And Golden State, by the time this NBA Finals tips off, they're going to have nearly 10 days rest. So Golden State's going to have about 2.5 times the rest that Toronto's going to have. Although Toronto, they get to stay home. They don't have to travel down to Oracle for games 1 and 2. I think Game 1 is going to be won by Golden State. And I think it's going to be a runaway game for Golden State in Game 1. Because they're going to take advantage of having that extra rest. Despite having to travel, not having the home court advantage, I think they still win Game 1. I think it's going to be an ideal runaway game. I think it's going to be like probably a 16 to 19 point victory for the Golden State Warriors in Game 1. Game 2, I think Toronto recovers and wins Game 2 at home. I think that, like I said, Marc Gasol, Pascal Siakam, I think those two will be huge difference makers down inside the paint. I think Toronto wins Game 2. Game 3, I think, goes to Golden State. I think this is where Kevin Durant comes back. I think Kevin Durant has a big performance that night. Ideally, Kevin Durant has big performances in Game 3 of the NBA Finals. We've seen Kevin Durant be clutch in the NBA Finals in Game 3 in the past. I think it's going to be that way again. I think Kevin Durant goes off for maybe about 35, 40 points that night. Golden State wins Game 3. Game 4, I think, goes to Golden State as well. I think they take advantage of having the strength in numbers in Oracle. I think they end up winning Game 4, having a 3-1 lead going into Toronto for Game 5. And Game 5, I think the Raptors win Game 5 to keep their season alive for at least a couple of more days. But then in Game 6, I think the Warriors clinch their three-peat in Oracle in front of their home fans just as a perfect exit for the Oracle Arena. Now, I know that some are saying that the NBA is going to be rigged for the Warriors, which, of course, it might be, it may not be. You just never know. But I will promise one thing. I guarantee that this NBA Finals will not be a sweep. Because there's no way the NBA is going to allow the Golden State Warriors to sweep in the NBA Finals 2 years in a row. It's horrible for the NBA, horrible for basketball, horrible for sports, horrible for business. So I promise you, the Raptors will at least win one game in this NBA Finals. In fact, in my prediction, I have them winning 2. I have the Warriors winning in 6. So comment your NBA Finals prediction down below. Also like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you next time. Have a wonderful day, wonderful evening, or whatever you're watching. See you next time.